Hey everyone, today I'm sitting down with Jay Allardyce to talk about the future of business intelligence and analytics. Jay is an industry leader in this space and the former general manager for Logi Symphony, a 3 times champion as rated by Infotech. I want to ask him about the state of business intelligence right now, where he sees this all going, and where Logi Symphony sits in the mix. Let's jump in. Hey Jay, thanks so much for joining today. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. I wanted to just start off by asking about, in your mind, like, what is the current state of data analytics and AI in 2025? Like, where are we right now? Where are we coming out of? Where are we going?
Yeah, Jeff. Well, thank you first and foremost. Super to be a part of this conversation and having some dialogue here. So 2025, like where are we in this amalgamation of data and AI? Probably a couple things to think about is one, data and data infrastructure is not new. I mean, it's been here for decades.
Yeah.
And now because of this infrastructure that is put in place from, web to mobile to cloud, and now this, broad distribution of data and the explosion of AI is coming to the forefront where everybody in the world is now seeing the impact of data that's at much more at their fingertips. And so I think the state of it, in my view, is this curiosity. People are
Mm.
now being able to interact with data in a way that it kind of been reserved more for a BI analyst, somebody who was behind the scenes serving up a report or analytics. So because of mobile, because of social, people are interacting much more and expecting much more insight about what they do. So I think the discoverability is a big piece. Second, because of the explosion of data, when we say from mobile to perhaps then IoT, and now thinking about AI, it is just the fact that this plumbing has been laid or has
Mm.
been put down such that people can, interact with data sets they perhaps would have never interacted with before. So their environment becomes much more interesting. So the second thing that comes into play is a lot of question about data security, availability, the rights, the ethics, and the use of it. And so there's a high degree of education requirement around that. And third is probably this entire aspect of just people realizing that because of the explosion of large language models and the shift to kind of an agentic framework is being able to interact with applications in a natural language way that you and I can start coding. I mean, the hottest topic now is vibe coding. You can see that flipping to analytics where your ability to interact with the data and your surroundings come into play. So those are just probably a few things. And to
Sure.
give the standard stamp that most do, as we're early, we're first
Yeah.
inning of a 9 inning game that's going to go extra innings. But I think I've used that statement a decade ago as well with big data.
Interesting. No, and so you mentioned, as you kind of painted the picture, I almost heard it as sort of two countervailing forces. There's one force which is like open data or data for everyone, right? Like it's accessible. You don't have to be, a data scientist or an expert to get your hands on the data to make the right queries. But then there's this necessary, like the risk component, if I can call it that, right? Like there's the need for data security, for accessibility rules, for education. How do you marry the two, right? Like one seems like it's a force that's going full speed ahead. One's kind of pushing back on it. For, an organization that's trying to balance being effective and responsible, what does that look like?
Yeah. So probably the top of my question for every CIO, CISO, and individuals that are stewards of that data. So let's take a highly regulated environment.
Huh.
If you think of healthcare, right? So you've got everything from PII to HIPAA to requirements for compliance that are absolutely necessary. The question then, in my view, is how does that role-based access controls really prevail to who needs to have access to what data to do the job that they need to do or that they've been put in the business to do for the organization. So role access security is not new. It has been around for a while, but it's going to become more robust. And a question then as data interfaces with agents or large language models is how does that accessibility or the derivative of that data get managed? So I think one comes back to thinking about the job to be done,
Mm.
who has access to what information, what do you actually want them to be doing, and is the security plane, if you will, there and available. So that
Right.
probably is the biggest factor for a organization to realize, okay, the data that we produce is in the right hands for the right people to do the right job. That you can stand behind. The to your point of the counterweights here is the explosion in information is everything. When ChatGPT came out, I think every organization, whether healthcare through to education to large corporations, said, hey, no, none of our data is going to go out to any of these models, right? There was a big policy that almost every corporation stood on. Now that is evolving. And so part of that is thinking about the deployment of where these models actually get put in place. So a big question is, everyone said, well, we're going to shift completely to the cloud. Now there's a big question of, well, hey, let's actually access data at where it resides. So for many enterprises, they want to keep it on premise, or they want it to at least be air gapped and being using cloud-based controls. So I think part of this has to realize there's a balance of the compliance to do right things to make sure you're managing stakeholder value as an enterprise, but also balance it with the curiosity. And the curiosity being allowing your organization to try, to use, to understand. And so I think it's very important for, I don't want to say enterprise policymakers, but CTOs, CIOs, business leaders to really understand the importance of data access. And so therefore you can actually, at both ends of the spectrum, at least understood and supported.
If you work in IT, Infotech Research Group is a name you need to know. No matter what your needs are, Infotech has you covered. AI strategy? Covered. Disaster recovery? Covered. Vendor negotiation? Covered. Infotech supports you with the best practice research and a team of analysts standing by, ready to help you tackle your toughest challenges. Check it out at the link below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So as CIOs, CTOs, roles like this grapple with this question, how much disruption are we seeing in this space right now and over the next few years? Like, is this a matter of, take the same people in the same structure and enable them? Or do you see like more fundamental, shifts and disruption required here in the way we structure ourselves to get the most out of this?
Yeah, this could be a question for a podcast in and of its own self. So, this one is very important, and it ties a little bit to some of the work I do outside of Insight Software on a couple of boards that are very education related. I'm a strong believer that you have to create context, have a shared context for something to be executed. Once that context is understood, people can move forward. And it's kind of a little bit of saying a context window for a prompt is defining what type of information goes in and what's retrieved. But I think the opportunity is, you have obviously the innovators that are trying and building agentic systems, and bigger question is how many have they deployed and how much is deployed in the enterprise. But when it comes down to the organization, to me, this is a moment that, I saw coming out of undergrad, going into, into big tech, and then seeing the web movement explode. It's an opportunity for people to have to relearn, reestablish what that is. And I want to put the analogy of, the shovel to steam shovel, or digging by hand to shovel, but it is that moment. And one big encouragement that I put out for our own team and others around is, if using an AI-based tool and actually vibe coding, perhaps using Cursor or using another tool itself, you need to go learn that. You need to build the reps to understand. And so the rate limiter isn't can you code, it is can you actually construct creative questions and reason and framing to know what it is that you're trying to build. So I think number one is, in this state is, everyone needs to be absolutely curious and fumble through it. There's not a playbook yet. So no one has written a book that said you should follow this. So the best playbook is try with limitation and managing risk. And it is absolutely not a wholesale change of saying an organization today can't be that of tomorrow, but it is making sure that if you think about your day job and think about the work that you do, and ask a question to say, could an agent or me interacting with a large language model actually make that work task easier? And try it. And so it's I think just a try by do and trial at this moment that a lot of us are going through across the enterprises. But it's no different than when we went through with IoT, no different than we went through with cloud. or mobile, everyone had a lot of questions, a lot of education, caught up to it. Security got better. So I think in this aspect, it's many people have said it's not AI that is going to replace your job. It's going to be individuals that understand how to use AI
Right.
that I don't want to say replace, but will be more competitive in positioning for roles going forward.
Right. No, it makes complete sense. So, maybe taking that one step further, I want to ask you who are going to be the organizations that are the winners and losers based on these shifts, right? And that can be by, you know, type of organization. It can be by, the skills or the behaviors that they adapt. What are you seeing as being the traits of the organizations that are starting to get ahead?
Yeah. So one thing I wrote about on LinkedIn, sometimes they'll have the pop-ups to say, hey, you have a thought, can you write about this? And I did, and I stand behind this one pretty strongly. We are a byproduct in an enterprise of the systems and organizations of how we're defined. So let me illustrate that.
Mm,
If you think about ERP systems or marketing systems or CRM systems, CS systems, dev systems, right? They are effectively, a system of record for a job function. And so team says, I manage everything out of Jira, or I manage everything out of Zendesk, or I manage everything out of Salesforce. And then you think about the work that you do is largely based on pulling
right.
data from those environments, manipulating it, sharing it in a presentation. But those are data silos. So the fact is, all this enterprise systems, yes, is exploded and transformed organizations, but also is now the new limiter. And
Mm,
so the opportunity in many ways for organizations is to say, those systems of record, make sure those stay in place. Now let's be much more engaging across those systems because the silos have to break down. And I'll illustrate one. Um, company, I know it's be a commercial, I guess, but for DevRev, the
mm,
marketing is great. The question of what it actually comes out to be is still open, but they're articulating the fact that if you build a product, it's not build, sell, deliver, support. It's not this value chain, but you're building from a development product perspective and CS should be absolutely as tight as possible, right? Why does a customer have to go get into the support ticket? It feels like that's the end of the line. You should be getting rapid iteration because you have analytics within the product. So your dev team is like, hey, I've anticipated this and I've now rolled out a new feature. Increases customer engagement, increases retention. And it's like, oh my gosh, the customer, the company's anticipated me. It's kind of like, I think Tesla is a great example of, obviously redefining how automobiles work in this case of, electrified vehicles. But the experience, I would always joke is say, every time you get in it, the car knows me better. Well, that's
mm,
exactly what they do. You're constantly updating, based on usage needs across, many, many people. But what is it doing at the end is helping you become that loyal customer to that particular product. So anyways, I think organizations, one, have to not look at the silos that they exist in. They have to get very smart and say, if in, let's say, enterprise software, I build a software product for this particular customer in this particular market, how do I be as obsessed in helping to support what I build, getting the feedback
right.
and engaging and not looking at my functions and say, well, support just deals with tickets. CS just deals with, engagement. Engineering just has to build stuff the product tells them to build. So all these silos, I think in many ways are going to be disrupted. So to your point in question, enterprises that are going to win are going to realize, let's get back to the thing that we do fundamentally well. We build great products for our customers and the best experience. So then how do I structure and organize the data
Mm,
and how I interact work teams to be better and more anticipatory for those type of engagements is probably the biggest things. And I firmly believe with an agentic framework or the ability to think about how systems can interact, you're going to break down these team silos very, very fast. And that's going to be the biggest opportunity for winners to
yeah.
evolve.
Yeah. That's really interesting to me, and I wanna dive a little bit deeper into that, into a little bit around the how, because, if I hear you correctly, Jay, like, there's this foundational, this foundational layer of the different, tools or applications, and then, you're saying on top of that, there's the ability to have this data integration, this, data interaction where you can be extractive in the value and actually break down some of these traditional barriers. So back to my original question, How? What does
Wow.
that look like? What are some of the tools organizations are using to do that?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit of how we're doing it as an example. If
Sure.
I think about the amount of support tickets that come in, I want to quickly look at categorization of the support tickets and understand how many of them might truly be just educational things that we have to fix in product.
Mm,
But the typical thing would be, these are logged in support is reviewing them, and then saying in some cross-functional, hey, product, I got to put this in the backlog. That's going to take weeks, months, and potentially quarterly releases. We look through it and scan that as quick as possible, put that into one of our models, be able to actually report that into a Logi dashboard, be able to interact with that back to engineering so that engineering has the same view as support versus the
mm,
context is support's view and categorization. And then somehow that is just passed to engineering through typical process. So those two teams have come back together to say, hey, this is actually the most viable signals for us that we've got to fix now, highest priority, because we don't want everyone to be sent to support because they didn't understand the product issue. It's a positioning issue. So in
right.
that particular how do we think about the data in those silos, but actually bring them forth and assemble the right people around it to answer the questions very quickly. Say, wow, you know what? I could do far better on engineering or in product, or frankly, in the marketing team to say, these are the message changes I have to make. So
Right.
that's a bit of the how of how you just kind of think about a tribe and a way how a team or a mission team might orient itself around data versus simply support has that data and they only have access to that. And then they report in the QBR.
Right. So, we've talked about the people piece there. So is one of the key success factors in your mind there just like making sure this is a tool that's being used by everyone? It doesn't just sit within, the data teams. Does it need to be a bit broader than that to be successful?
Yeah, I firmly believe so. Back to this common context. So if we believe we know the type of customers we want to go after, we know the type of customers we support, we understand their profiles, everybody rallies around that versus support's got their slice of it, sales has their slice of it with Salesforce, marketing has their slice of it with Pardot or pick another tool. And then data's got their view of tickets. Those are all functional things to run a function. But what is the main objective? Knowing more about our customer, being more
Mm,
effective and more anticipatory of what they need. And that is not function based or siloed based. That is
right.
customer based. So I think what you'll see is many software products are now blurring the lines and merging. You hear this in marketing and sales where new roles emerge as being the go-to-market engineer. I can use all these agentic tools to help me target my customers better, but I don't have to do it with 15 different teams that are,
Mm,
trying to assemble it together. I've now become more effective of what? Targeting, responding, and attracting my customers.
right. So for most organizations that are using this technology, Jay, are you finding they're creating new roles like that? Are they like creating new working patterns across groups? You know, how are they getting value out of it? And how is it changing the way that they're doing business?
Yeah. So I'll take first stance for ourselves, feeling like, just trying to lean into it all. We
Sure.
absolutely have tiger teams around different data sets where everybody's looking at it and having a conversation because when marketing brings it up and says, this is how I view the world, you have to first realize how are they metric? How do they look at the world? You may not share that view. Not
Mm,
you don't believe it. You just don't spend your day in that.
right.
So if you're rallying around that information, then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I got marketing's perspective, I've got sales perspective, I have CSs and support, but it's all based on, one data set. I've seen a variety of enterprise customers thinking about ways where everything from product design and engineering is much more in a true team uh, setup versus it's been product giving a requirement, engineering building it, maybe bringing in design or design not getting prioritized. But again, you're trying to build a customer experience that is data driven. So it actually needs all three of those groups. So, that's just another example, but you do find this opportunity where what before was you as an individual don't have access to an SAP environment. And again, not debating the access control rights question, but you didn't. And so therefore you're up to having someone interpret what information is coming out of that system and also the time it takes. If you have access to those environments and you understand how to bring that into a model, ask very different questions, you're going to get answers far faster. And we just did that this morning when I asked somebody about, upsells. And the typical way would take the data, let's go review a Power BI dashboard, get some structured view of that. He actually took that entire list, threw it into Claude, had the answer, and rank ordered all the information in 4 different cuts. And I said, this is just imprinted in my mind, and that's all I needed to know. So it's changing the way people engage in these environments. And like, we're just certainly at the start and everyone's learning through it.
Right. No, that's really cool to hear, and it's you can get a sense of what some of the opportunities are by having that kind of rallying around where the value is, and breaking down some of those silos. You may have already answered this in some capacity, but I did want to ask it head on, Jay, which is,
Yeah.
why do you find your customers or organizations pick Logi? Like, what is it about it, and its view of the world and its capabilities that make them choose it, and make them love it?
Yeah. Wonderful question. So we find ourselves every time we get through a POC, through a technical POC, customers are blown away. And so the depth of not only being able to access information, role-based connectors, so the breadth of it. So that's kind of basic table stakes. The data processing is really where it sits. The ability to discover, move through your data, manipulate, maintain that, and do that with much more flexibility. And then being able to have choice of how you'd actually deploy that, whether that's embedded, whether that's BI, building a new application, or an API. So a lot of our customers look at it and said, I had no idea. And when they get in, they start to realize the absolute configuration, the customization, but also just how fast they can process through the information at scale. So customers look at us as a way to say they have much more control than being able to use maybe some of the traditional BI tools
Mhm.
that have limitation. And especially for product leaders that are trying to build very detailed analytical and data-based applications, they have far more control to have a higher customer engagement and or experience, a very rich
Right.
set, which has been great. And I think for most of our customers is when they realize the depth that they have of being able to do a basic report, or being able to do a pixel perfect, PDF report that is as a result of a dashboard. Those are all great pieces, but when they really feel like they've got the control to not only extend what they have, but also think about the way that our framework is now built, underpinning with Logi AI. Not only is it bring your own large language model, because we're never to invest in a model ourselves, just given how fast the market is going, but more importantly, having the agentic framework to build agentic applications into those existing workflows. So those are just a handful of different things that our customers really come to us for, and trust, and want to see those experiences built within their branded applications.
Sure. So, uh, just lots for me to digest there, and lots of interesting directions to go in. But you did mention kind of some of the agentic applications here. So what does that look like in your world, and what capabilities, do you help organizations unlock there?
Yeah. So one thing that we are going to be releasing here this year, so it's in progress. One of the biggest problems that many customers and actually many enterprises have is this adage of, if you're an AI engineer, you want to focus on AI stuff. And
Mm,
the joke that most have is, well, I'm spending 90% of my time wrangling data, right? Because we know that AI is only
sure.
good as the data it has access to. And so we want to alleviate that pressure. We want to be able to make the accessibility to information much more process driven, anticipatory, and doing that with a true governed and role based access, such that as a user, if I want to connect to the source that I have access to and another, but then having the right agent based framework that is constantly being able to update true CDC type setup, then you're spending more time. What are you doing with the data? And what products do you build as a result of that? We think this has extreme promise,
Mm,
and it's been early validated with a lot of analysts as well as early customers. So what that will do, in essence, is when you think about what AI is allowing people to do today, in short order become much more creative, much more ability to spend time on things that I would say are higher order value, versus a lot of things that are in preparation for a report
Right.
or application. And by doing that, you will be spending more time talking with your data. And that is where the market heads. That
Yeah.
is absolutely a bet that we believe strongly, because you and I shouldn't spend time in the prep of that. We should be talking about what is it that we've pulled out, what insights are here that we should interact with. And too much of that behind the scenes time is a true productivity opportunity to take on.
Right. So with that in mind, th- lots lots of potential there that you can unlock, and you talk about data as kind of underpinning that, and the ability to be able to do that at your fingertips versus having to go trawling around looking for the right data. So what is it leads me to believe that configuration and customization are really, really important here. What does that look like? How difficult is this? How time consuming is it? And for Logi, how kind of systems agnostic is it? Like, can you join together all these disparate systems? What does this kind of implementation typically look like?
Yeah. So for many customers, as they may want to build out an application, it may come from a single data source. It might come from a Snowflake data warehouse. It may come from Google BigQuery, what have you.
Mm.
So those are some very simple accessibilities to single source environments. We've got customers that want to have that control plane that can go across multiple data sources, and that's nothing more than bringing additional data sources into the fold in kind of the work plane. So for many, in terms of the configuration customization, it depends on where you are in the app. If you're building out visualizations that are specific to your app and or experience and wanting to make changes based on that customer feedback and interaction, have dynamic ability to make that happen. So very easy.
Right.
Because part of this is if you look at some of the CAN structures that BI tools do, you're kind of playing to the visuals and the interactivity that they've built.
Right.
But if you think about trying to be as responsive to your customer, there's going to be constant change and need, and you're going to want to
Mhm.
know that no different than A/B testing on the web.
Right.
And so having the flexibility to change, what people are actually landing on, using, engaging on is highly important. So there's a fair degree of configuration and or customization there.
Right.
From a data perspective, that's where a lot of people will spend time in the visual data discovery and wanting to know and being able to wallow into asking questions about the data, because it's kind of, simply said, like a choose your own adventure. So for many analysts that are very data savvy, the ability to not just ask one question about their data, but be able to ask more, to do joins, to be able to bring that forward into different application experiences, it gives them the flexibility and the breadth to be able to do so with much more control than you would have some of the traditional environments that we've seen.
Right. That makes sense. Well, thank you for sharing that. I did want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about Logi and kind of the organization here, and hopefully you won't take too much offense in me saying that. I think for me and maybe for some others listening, like Logi in some ways fell off my radar for a little bit there, and I'm so excited to see that you guys, like, you've been recognized recently as an industry leader in data and analytics, which is so cool. But for those who haven't been following the organization, uh, you know, zealously, like, can you give us some of the inside baseball of what's been going on behind the scenes there?
Yeah, you bet. Let me paint the picture. So the Logi Symphony platform and the portfolio. So we have just north of 1,000 customers, which have come through various acquisitions from Izenda, Exago, Dundis, JReports, Logi XML, as well as Zoom Data. And so bringing all those components together, you actually have an extremely powerful platform. Again, doing three simple things: connect to a variety of disparate data sources to be able to process it at scale and be able to actually push those insights into various forms, embedded BI, an API, or building your own application. And so there's a concerted effort in bringing all these companies together that probably have some of the richest heritage of data processing, visualization, as well as application control, and now truly having a platform that some people will say is future-proofed, conversations. But I like to say it more of, you've got the flexibility for the fact that as this AI market is evolving,
Mm.
You want to make sure that you're bringing all the controls and capability closer to your data, and we enable that from Logi. And so it is I'll call it a brand repositioning.
Mm.
We absolutely give all that full control capability to product builders, product developers, product managers, chief data officers, and doing so in a way that makes their lives easier so they can build better experiences for their customers through their applications, but also having the extreme horsepower to manage and process data at scale. So yes, it is a bit of
Mm.
repositioning,
Cool.
but the great thing is our Insight software portfolio leverages the product in some of our largest and most extensive applications as well.
Yes.
So not only is it a user internally, it supports our Open Business Data Fabric platform, but then the ability to sell to this ICP and market, we are reestablishing that position.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, helpful for me to understand, some of the behind the scenes. So thank you for that. You briefly mentioned before, Logi AI and some of the investment that's going on there. What does that look like, and how integral is it? Do you think into the future of the technology?
Yeah, wonderful question. It is absolutely at the forefront. So when I joined Insight Software, decision route that I kind of had is, when I think of AI, I think of three different factions. Either you're building the infrastructure to support AI in terms of large language models, compute, and scale out, or you're building native AI applications, as we see all over the market today. At third, you are potentially going into existing products and reimagining those experiences. So I've done the former two. I hadn't done the latter. So this is actually an interesting step because if you think about the challenge is because of AI systems and you look at the likes of Replit or Cursor or Bolt or Lovable, people that are non-tech have the ability to build applications. So what's happening now is the domain knowledge of how you build things is much more prevalent than is it from a technical development perspective. And so the biggest challenge every startup has is what? Acquiring customers. And so you have so many .ai companies out there today. And the challenge for many is positioning a message of trust, brand value, building their audience around their product. I looked at the view to say within Insight Software, we actually have a dearth of customers. How do we actually make the products that they've used and invested in, but bring forward the best of AI such that it's worked with them? So that's just kind of a little bit of a story of arrival. But the biggest thing for us is kind of twofold is one, we were first to market when we talked about bring your own large language model because there's no way to kind of predict who's going to win outright.
Mm.
But that's not so much the game, but the fact that people are going to choose. As you think about choosing your own development environment, we want people to have the ability to choose which model is best fit for them. And then second is as this evolves to much more an agentic based framework, um, it's the opportunity to make sure that applications can become much more dynamic and the interactivity of that data and that it is truly a product set that will evolve versus it potentially inherently could become legacy. So it's kind of
Mm.
interesting in this evolution, but it's at the forefront of our innovation, not only in the application experience, but much more so in the data processing, which is
Right.
which is cool.
No, that's cool. And it sounds like, if I understand you correctly as well, Jay, like you guys are, I think I'm supposed to say, like drinking your own champagne when it comes to some of this technology as well. Is that fair?
Yeah. As I was mentioning, when the companies got acquired into that software, they actually purpose built the business case for it for using a lot of the reporting and flexibility of that reporting for ERP based applications. And it has since evolved and it's being used in multiple parts of the portfolio, but also powering one of the very largest portions of our portfolio that can't serve too much yet per se,
Hmm.
but it's absolutely being the core engine for serving up data driven applications. And
Cool.
so as a result of that, we get a tremendous amount of feedback at significant customer scale of
Mm.
why it works. And to many people's, you know, discovery is like, I had no idea how deep this was. And so
Right.
it's very interesting to get a lot of that feedback. And so the opportunity for us is to retell that story to the market externally Because, I don't know many CIOs today that love to spend time transitioning off one system to the next. They want to
Right.
ensure that the system that they have is the
Sure.
best for their need and serving their, business counterparts or other stakeholders.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I do want to talk more about, chief data officers, CIOs, the roles in the organizations that you're working with. As we think, zooming out a little bit just about data and analytics and AI and where all of this is going, what's kind of your best advice to these leaders about what they need to be doing right now to get ahead?
Yeah. I would say first and foremost, remove the bias that you've had of, well, I worked with this tool before, therefore that's what we're going to work on and use at the next company.
Mm.
This is an absolute learning moment to rethink the principles of data interactivity and decision making. And that's not because I had this tool, therefore we should use. So number one is think about how your organization is making decisions and what information is supporting those decisions. Then get to, well, where does that information reside? And then therefore, how do I best serve it? I think we've come at it so much that was very much in a sales and procurement cycle of, well, I have to get this because it's got the best discount
Mm.
and this is the way we're going to deploy it. And that's not actually how products are best built, right? You don't force it down a team's throat. I mean, for every product builder, you want to get customer feedback of what works best, what makes their life better, versus, hey, we bought this and now let's go implement it. I have to bring you along that process.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a change. And I think the flexibility that we have now is being much more agnostic to solving those problems versus I have to wait for 12 months before a tool rolls out
Right.
just to only find that it's already legacy by the time it's made it out there. So that would be
Right.
kind of one. I think two is this notion of self-service. We've talked about it ad nauseum for years that make data available and everyone should be able to access the data. If you are very data oriented, that is absolutely true. There's a lot of people that are not in the organization.
There's
So I think as much as you want to be a self-service BPO or an outsourced environment to make that available for others, really come back to again what outcome, what problem you're trying to solve, what is needed to run the business. Because we've seen firsthand, because more reports are created, more information is created, it has just created more work and
right.
and a lack of productivity. So I would simply say rethink the data architecture and landscape that you have. Back to those questions. And then the last part of it is, absolutely be curious. And I know that sounds very, you know, general in statement, but what I mean by that is, there's so much opportunity to look across teams. You're not in a shared service to say, let me go deliver what I need to for sales ops or for procurement or for others. But be truly strategic as a leader to say, if I knew I could answer these 3 or 4 questions in a very fast, dynamic way,
Mm.
would it help this business perform better? Would it help us to make better decisions so folks can get on doing the work versus we have an entire infrastructure to support, report building.
Right.
So just a
Mm.
few things.
No, I like that. It absolutely resonates with me, and I love the focus of it and the orientation there. Um, just staying on the topic of these roles, I mean, I think it's hopefully not controversial to say that these are roles being bombarded with hype, with different, vendors, with different organizations telling them, oh, all of this is going to change. You need this tool, you need this mindset, you need this consultant. From where you're sitting, Jay, um, what in that is the noise? Like, is there anything you're hearing a lot of now that you're like, you know what, that is BS. I think we can safely tune that out. That's all hype.
Yeah. There's probably a few things. One just off a recent conversation we had earlier is, well, we've got a large language model built into our app. Well, maybe is the question, do you have it built into the application or is it calling out to some service? Or you have this, well, we have a chat window as well. Again, that is just an interface. That
Right.
that is us talking in this environment. But truly the smarts of how do you access data? How are you actually building the right type of train to support your data? That is your information, is the most valuable. The interface is irrelevant. It is dumb as the the prompt screen, as we've seen in green screens before, we have to make it more intelligent. So always double click into that, ask them through workflow of understanding how would you actually interact with our data and what sort of questions can we, pose into that? Is it purely through prompts? Is it natural language processing? Does it build, dashboards in an automated way? Like start to ask questions about your use cases to really question and challenge the .ai, kind of push out there. That'd be one. I would say two is, when you get into this point of, well, we want to try it at a low price point and just get going fast. I get that. But also be mindful, just because you have so much accessibility to different tools, just think about, again, your end requirement of what you're building and who you're building it for. You're going to want something that's going to scale with you. And so think about, the applications that actually will grow with you and a consumption-based model that are secure and available, because for us, in the embedded case, we sit within an application. And so we have to make sure that what we built is purpose built for those applications to scale and build the best experience. Because that, again, we may not know all the details of it, but we need to act and operate as a way that we understand those customers as good as they understand themselves. And I think sometimes, people get through to a sale and they're like, geez, wait a minute, this is far less capability than I want. And I got sold on a very nice website. So make sure that the diligence continues, just knowing the fact you have a lot more access to a lot more systems that you could try.
Well said. Well said.
From your vantage point, as you talk to a lot of different folks in the space and you hear trends, I mean, what would you coach us on? Like, what would you help us think about as a team, as an organization, in support of our customers?
It's a really good question. To me, and I say this with full knowledge of, I don't have I don't have a deep understanding of exactly your implementation model and what that looks like. But what I will say is, one of the trends and one of the things people seem to be hungrier and hungrier for is a feeling of having a partner here, right? And moving beyond a tool or an implementation to, there is someone in this space I'm working with who understands my needs, can predict my needs, can tell me what other people are doing, and kind of help me stay ahead, right? So it's not necessarily like because we're going into this period, or going through this period of really heavy change, people just don't know what they don't know. And they're very curious about, what is everybody else doing? Can someone validate what I'm doing and help kind of coach me a bit? So that would be probably the number one trend that I'm seeing here, that I think is going to be valuable for software players in this space, and for tools in this space.
That's great feedback. And I think for me, the way I would summarize it is, move away from selling, the deal and the conversation, and become much more of a trusted advisor.
That's right.
In this shift. And as it is evolving as fast as it is, I think there are so many questions that folks have. I hate to say we're in it together, but the reality of someone feeling like, I understand you and the needs. Well said.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Jay, I wanted to say a big thank you for joining today. Really appreciate, everything you shared with us, and especially your insights.
Yeah, you bet. Jeff, thanks a lot. It was great spending some time.